guys, it's Bonobo from Sweden, and in today's video we are taking a look at something slightly worrying. And the thing that is worrying has to do with float values, specifically some of the best floats in the game. Like this Huntsman Brightwater is the #1 best float in the game for a Huntsman Brightwater. Look at the float, 0.4 zeros and a 1, but this might not be the case for very much longer because of an update that happened to CS recently, which honestly could have an effect on every single #1 float in the game, both high and low float, and every other low float skin that exists. But before I talk more about that, I want to thank today's video sponsor, which is CS Money. CS Money is a trusted trading site and marketplace where you can quickly trade for a brand new loadout in just a couple of seconds. They have reduced prices in the trade mode and a huge selection of filters for their over 1 million skins listed that have instant delivery. They've got many payment methods like cards, PayPal, crypto, and much more, and you can always trade your skins if you can't deposit. Their market mode also has a feature with lower prices and discounts, as well as an instant sell feature where they recently increased prices on user skins so you can insta sell them and receive more cash to spend on skins or cash out. So make sure you try out CS Money from the link in the description, and thank you CS Money for sponsoring. Now let's get back to the video. Now, it all started with this update we got in October, the Retake update, where they extended the trade-up contract so you can trade up reds to golds. What they failed to mention is that they also updated the very way that trade-ups even work. In the past, when you did a trade-up contract, the actual numerical value of the float values of the skins you were trading up really mattered. If you were trading up battle-scarred skins, the outcome was going to be really bad because the number was so high, and if you traded up only factory news, the outcome was going to be really good because the number of the float value is so low. However, now after the Retake update, the number doesn't really matter. It all has to do with the float cap of that skin. Well, in the past, if you traded up 10 of these FUBARs, even though they were well worn with a good float, they would have counted to a really bad outcome because 0.40 well worn, that's a high value. Well worn is a bad condition. However, now after the update, if you traded up 10 of these with a 0.40 float, even though they're well worn, relative to the float cap, that's really good float, so it would count towards an extremely factory new outcome. And this is the problem for all of those really high or low float golds. For example, you can trade up a low float field tested op Asimov and still get an ultra low float factory new gold. That's something that was never possible before, even with non-red items. So it just unlocked a whole new world of trade-upable items that are now viable for trade-ups. What this gold trade-up update also opened up the possibility to is hand-picking the exact float you want of your golds. So for example, someone crafted this combo, M9 Sapphire, so not only was he incredibly lucky to get it, but look at the float, 0.008888888. And the gloves are factory new amphibious gloves, 0.066666666. Holy shit. And I don't know if we have a name for these already in CS. I would call them solid float values because they're solidly filled with just the same number. For example, this one, 8888, and that comes from banknote collecting. For example, this is a banknote from North Korea, and look at the serial number. It's just 4444, and that's called a solid fours serial number. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense, no? That's at least what I'm gonna call them. And all of this is caused by the fact that you can now, with 100% accuracy, guarantee what float value you're gonna get on your knives. But like I said, this video is more about the #1 float values of the highest and the lowest floats that are now easily beatable. And no, I'm not just talking shit. I've actually prepared a spreadsheet here with all of the low and high float skins which have already been beaten. In total, we searched basically every knife and glove that exists. We may have missed some, but I think this should be a conclusive list, at least as of right now, of all of the top 10 best and worst floats that have already been beaten. And for those top 10, there are already 33 golds that have beaten the previous top 10 holders. Out of those, 24 were knives and 9 were gloves. For some of the higher float, low float skins that were beaten, we can start with driver gloves Racing Green with a float of 0.0603. That is very low. And if the crafter of these was a bit more lucky. Instead of the number 10 lowest racing green, he could have ended up with the number 10 lowest vice gloves if he was just a teeny bit luckier. Another gold with a much better than average float is the Stiletto Black Pearl, number 9 in the world with a float of 0.005, which is very cool. Another Black Pearl, Ursus Black Pearl with a float of 0.006, making it the 8th best Ursus Black Pearl, and it was just crafted. Another absolutely crazy craft is an M9 Emerald with a float of 0.0009, making it the 6th best M9 Emerald that ever existed. And other than that, being able to craft float-capped golds is just insane to me. Like, for example, knives that are Night or Night Stripe, like Ultraviolet or Crimson Web, because these used to be really rare, but now they're pretty easily guaranteed in a trade-up. Like, for example, this Huntsman Ultraviolet, which was crafted very recently, with a float of 0.0607, meaning it is factory new, and it's also the 7th best Huntsman Ultraviolet ever. Another cool craft is a Flip Sapphire with a float of 0.00100, which is pretty cool. And this one is actually for sale right now for $1,600, which is still, in my opinion, pretty high. Extremely fucking weird is this M9 Marble with a pretty nice reddish tip with a float of 0.0799, making it the 3rd highest float M9 Marble ever. Because of the float being so extremely high, this must have been very deliberately crafted to be such a high float, and I guess he was just trying to hit some other number 1 highest float gold or so, because I'm not sure why someone would want to craft this one. Getting into some of the really scary crafts with the top 2 positions, meaning the absolute best or the 2nd best float skins, we have the Nomad Ruby with a float of 0.0001, making it the 2nd best Nomad Ruby ever to be crafted. Finding ingredients to craft such a low float knife is pretty difficult, and then having the luck to hit a ruby, this is generational luck. Oh, a very scary knife we have is Karambit Black Pearl with a float of 0.0773 minimal wear. Now, as you might know, the float range for a Doppler is only factory new and very, very rarely minimal wear, with a value closer to 8 being extremely rare, and this being 7 is very hard to actually achieve. And the fact that he does this trade up and not only hits the best knife in the case, the Karambit, and hits a gem, but actually the rarest gem that's possible, the Black Pearl. Now, this is the 2nd highest float value Karambit Black Pearl that exists, but if you only look at non-stat track, this is actually the highest float Kara Black Pearl that exists. And this is a knife that's been unboxable for like 10 years now. So Valve just updating the game with gold trade-ups and this being instantly beaten is kind of ridiculous. And even with gold trade-ups, this is gonna be a very hard knife to beat. And he also has it on sale for $65,000. Ah, yes! Not delusional at all. We also have another Karambit, the Bright Water factory new with a float of oh my god! With a float of 0.00008. I get like number blindness, you know, there's so many zeros, it gets hard to read. And this Karambit is the 2nd best Bright Water that exists and has ever existed, and it's also on sale right now for $1,400. And now, gentlemen, for the actual number 1 float skins that have been beaten, both highest and lowest. Starting with the highest float Talon Case Harden, which was crafted and has a float of 0.999. And it looks like this. Unfortunately, not like a blue gem, but honestly, it's hard even seeing what knife this is. This looks like a fucking bacteria test, you know, they do in the hospital. It's so bad that it doesn't even look like a Case Hardened anymore, which I guess is kind of cool. Now, the Karambit Black Pearl was kind of the number 1 highest float, but if you include stat tracks, it's not actually the lowest. From what we found in the entire list, there's only one Doppler that beats out both categories for the number 1 highest float, and it's this StatTrak Paracord Doppler Phase 4. This has a float of 0.07997, which, like I showed you the Doppler float caps, this is extremely high. This was definitely deliberately crafted to be a really poo float. I think maybe he was hoping for a gem, because a Paracord Phase 4, it's kinda random, but if this was a Skeleton Ruby, for example, it would have been very cool. Now, by far the most expensive skin on this entire list are the Hedge Maze Gloves factory new with a float value of 0.060, which means, yes, these are the number one lowest hedge mazes that exists. Now, just for reference, even in this CS economy, the cheapest factory new hedge mazes with a bad float are still $30,000 or more. Back before the gold trade-up update, these were selling for around $50,000. Now, I have no idea what this number one hedge maze would actually cost, but I would guess in the high to very high 5 figures. Now, Sparkles actually traded up to one number one knife. It's the number one butterfly knife lore with a float of 0.4 zeros and a 3, which is absolutely insane. Not only did he get the best knife out of, I think, 5 from that case, he got a very good pattern, the lore. Now, another 2 number one float gloves were actually traded up to. First, we have the Bloodhound gloves bronzed with a float of 0.0600, making it the number one float. And we also have the driver gloves convoy with a float of 0.060, also making it the number one best float. And funny enough, both of these gloves are actually for sale, the bronzed for 3,000 and the convoys for 2,000. Are either of them worth that much? I don't think so, no. Of the few number one knives that have been beaten, Flip Knife Fade is one of them with a float of 0.04, which means, yes, of course, this is the number one lowest float Flip Knife Fade that exists. And before you ask, no, it's not 100% fade, this is only 89% fade, so nothing spectacular. This one is also for sale for $1,000, which I think this is actually kind of cool. Is it worth it? No, probably not, but I mean, look, the number 2 non-stat track lowest sale for 31,000. Ah, yes! Maybe I'll buy it! And now the final number one skin that I could find, this list has maybe updated since, but it's the Sport Gloves Vice factory new with a float of 0.06005. The cheapest factory new Vices are right now 9,800, but that's light compared to what it was a couple of months ago when it was touching $19,000. Thankfully, the guy who traded up to these Vices was actually recording the reaction, so we can take a look at that. I think it's his friend doing it in Discord or something.
No, come on, bro, print stream.
Oh yeah, shit. No, I'm fucking.
He almost picked the wrong items.
Yo, Kev.
He does it so quick.
Oh my god.
Potentially the world's lowest flow.
Vice.
What is
come
it?
On.
Vice,
Oh my God,
come
oh my
on.
God, oh my God.
He called it.
Oh, wait!
What the fuck?
Oh my God! That's crazy! That is unbelievable.
No way. That's absolutely insane. I wish more people who were doing these crazy float trade-ups would record their reaction, because that's always fun to see. And these Vices are actually on sale for 56,000, which I think is definitely too high. I remember the old number one was on sale for the longest time for I think 20 to 25, and it just wasn't selling. But all the luck to him in selling these very rare low float Vices. Now, obviously, this is either a problem or a new opportunity, depending on how you look at things. I would say if you're currently a person who's holding number one float golds, I would be a bit worried, because now they're so much easier to beat. You used to have to rely on the random number generator when getting it from a case, but now you can actually guarantee them, which is a lot riskier. And you remember that lowest float Fire Serpent that I traded up to? Well, I've actually sold it since this update, just because I'm not sure it's gonna stay number one forever. And right now, since this update, they just made it easier to trade up to low float skins. So yes, it's a cool opportunity to trade up to low float skins, but holding on to them, at least for me, I don't think it's worth the risk. But anyways, thank you guys for watching this video on the new float trade up system and why low float or custom floats is something that we're gonna see a lot more of in the near future. Whoop him!